Good afternoon. Thank you. Would you please go ahead and take a chair, and we'll get started with the program. There are some empty seats that you can fill in. And there's a couple seats vacated up front here if you'd like to come up front. Looks like we have about 5 seats up here if you'd like to join us. Thank you. Well, welcome. I'm John Stride. I'm the president of City Club of Portland, and we're delighted to welcome you here to our monthly Friday forum. It is my honor and an honor for City Club to be joined by Portland City Auditor Simone Rede and Oregon Public Broadcasting journalist Alex Zielinski. Let's give a welcome. Our two guests will discuss the many and diverse responsibilities of the Portland City Auditor, a position unlike any other auditor in the state and faces immediate challenges like any other. But before we begin, would you just take a moment and silence your cell phones? Thank you. Now, just a short word about City Club. Our mission is to inform members and the community about matters leading them to appreciate the responsibilities of citizenship. We accomplish this through producing nonpartisan public forums, debates, research that inform them about elections and public policy. The City Club is committed to providing a space for civic dialogue that encourages respectful discussion and positive change. And it is the City Club members themselves who provide the ideas, the conversations, conduct the research, and plan programs that address the issues important to our community. Members' dues and donations make it possible for City Club to offer programs such as this one, free to the public. Everyone is welcome at City Club. If you care about good government and the welfare of our community, join us and become a member and take part in those activities that make City Club work. You can learn more about City Club and become a member at pdxcityclub.org. And we thank those of you for your support of this event. For developing today's program, we have a special thanks for Kayla Kennett, the City Club Communications Director, and Sam Metz and Dana Bach of City Club's Program Committee for attending to all the details needed to produce a program like this one. And we want to thank our sponsors, AARP Oregon and Fight Against Sex Trafficking, for their support. Let's give them our And now to our program. Portland City Auditor is responsible for diverse areas of our city government, including the City Ombudsman's Office and the Fraud Hotline, the City Council Clerk, the City Archives, Records, and Library, city elections, not to be confused with county elections, overseeing election finance and lobbying practices, hearings that review the city administrative practices, including land use, code enforcement, towing, and appeals of city decisions, and of course, auditing city services. In some respects, the auditor's office is the public face of the city and is frequently the first elected official many residents will encounter. Auditor Rede was born in Salem and raised in Northeast Portland. She has been a lifelong public servant, spending some time working in high schools. She has a bachelor's degree in urban studies and a master's in public policy. It sounds like the perfect resume to be a City Club member. She took office as Portland's auditor in 2023. As auditor, she faces a variety of immediately challenging issues, including facing the changing and sometimes unpredictable federal policies, interactions with homeless communities, including personal welfare checks and towing of vehicles used as shelters, changing city DEI policies, sequencing the city activities that receive audits, an upcoming city election, balancing the relationships with city councilors who, for the first time in over 100 years, represent the discrete constituencies, not the entire city, and a state constitutional challenge to the auditor by a former mayoral candidate. Leading this discussion is Alex Zielinski. Ms. Zielinski covers Portland city politics for OPB. She previously covered government as the new editor of the Portland Mercury, and before that worked as a journalist in San Antonio, Texas, and Washington, D.C. Ms. Zielinski is a graduate of the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. So this promises to be an interesting program. After the discussion, we'll take questions from the audience, and while all attendees had the opportunity to submit questions when you registered, the asking questions at City Club programs is a privilege of membership. So if you're a member, please come to the microphone when it's presented, and you can ask your questions. And now, Auditor Rede and Ms. Zielinski, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Oh, it's on. Classic radio journalist who never knows when a microphone is on. Well, first I want to start that if I had to work anywhere in City Hall, often I don't know why I think about this because I don't think I'd ever do it, but I think it would be the auditor's office because your staff's able to spend months, years sometimes on investigations that in a modern newsroom that is not always the luxury. So I'm interested and excited to poke some holes into the work you do and learn a little bit more in this conversation. Let's start with the basics. So John just listed off the responsibilities of your office, but I'm curious in your own words, how do you explain your work and why it matters to average Portlanders?
I often lean on the mission of our office, which was established in the city charter, which is to ensure open and accountable government. I think that's a slightly more concise way of explaining that we house a ton of accountability and transparency functions for the city. We exist to serve the public interest.
What part of all of those functions drew you maybe the most to this job? Like what excites you the most about the work you do?
Well, my background is in performance auditing. As you mentioned, like it's very exciting to have access to city records, personnel, getting to observe city programs, understand how they work behind the scenes, and get to recommend improvements for how they can serve Portlanders better. So definitely the performance auditing function is what drew me to this work, but getting to oversee corollary functions like the ombudsman, which is working on a much tighter time frame to respond directly to complaints from the public, is very exciting to me. And then getting to oversee the city archives. I've really grown my appreciation for that work. I think it's incredibly important that community members can see themselves reflected in the city's history. So very excited about the work that we're doing there to grow relationships with community and help them preserve their own history.
Can you walk us through how you decide and your office decides what to audit, what programs or policies? I know there are different routes in, but how does one kind of rise to the surface?
Yeah, so it's kind of a cyclical process. Every year, our office publishes a schedule of audits, which is a list of topics that we're planning to review in any given year. In my role as auditor, as an elected official who's directly accountable to voters, I am trying to keep my eyes and ears on what matters to Portlanders. I do that by reading the news, listening to public testimony at council meetings, and those kind of give me broad ideas about where are problems in our city government. And I really rely on the professional staff in the audit services division to turn those big ideas into auditable topics. So they are responsible for reviewing the risks and the budget, how much is the city spending on any given program? Are there threats to public health that a failed program might pose to community members? We take that list and narrow it down, and then we ask Portlanders, what matters to you? What are areas that you would like to see audited? And that gives us a final list of probably only 5 topics each year. We have to be really judicious with our limited resources because, as you mentioned, audit work is very in-depth. So we have to make those tough choices about what we can look into each year. But the authority rests with me to pick those topics. I think that's really important because unlike other structures in government, auditors are reporting to management, and so they are seeking questions that managers are interested in, maybe not as relevant to the public interest.
So Portland went through a historic government overhaul last year. As many in this room, I'm sure, are aware, councilors are no longer elected citywide. Mayor no longer sits on council. The responsibilities of all elected officials in City Hall have changed, except for yours. I'm curious how, if there are any ways that your work has changed with this, ginormous change to the way our city operates, and how so? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think you've pointed out an important quality of the auditor's office, which is to be a real stable, reliable source of information for Portlanders. I think you've also rightly pointed out the role itself has not changed. It's more the relationships that we are navigating in this new form of government with a legislative branch and an executive branch. One really practical way that we're relating in a different way is, instead of issuing audit recommendations that commissioners in charge are responding to for the bureaus that they oversee, we're sending those recommendations to the city administrator, who is coordinating a more centralized response to the problems that we've identified. I think another way is just, kind of the bumps of working out this new form of government is learning where our lines are between the different branches. Yesterday, my office gave a presentation to City Council, and we had a conversation about where the council clerk should reside. By charter, that's been part of the auditor's office for as long as I know. But there were questions about whether maybe that should be more of an administrative function, or maybe that should be, a function that reports to the council. And my response to that was, it really belongs in the auditor's office, because that's where the public can trust that meetings will be open and accessible to the public. The minutes that are taken to document those meetings are going to be accessible and archived for the public to access. So those are some of the interesting conversations that we're having, I think, with newly elected folks and, returning, seasoned elected officials.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, with this change in government too, we only now have 2 elected officials who are elected citywide, right? All these other councilors are elected by district. They used to be elected citywide. I'm curious how that informs the way you think about audits and being able to represent the entire city, maybe even if you're working differently with councilors to make sure you're listening to certain district by district issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned in our annual process for setting the audit schedule, we do solicit ideas from city leadership on what they would like to see audited. That's an opportunity that we offer all of the elected officials, including the mayor and the 12 councilors. I think something for us to consider and work through as we release these audits is who's getting to receive the results. I mentioned that the city administrator responds officially to our recommendations, but in terms of engaging legislators who can really be champions for some of our audit findings, and encourage action from administration to be responsive to them. We've had some conversations about whether we should be sharing results at council meetings that include all 12 elected councilors, or if we should be heard at the committee level. And I've been pretty adamant that it's important for all of the elected officials to be hearing our results, because there might be inequities across the city where problems are more acutely felt in one district versus another. So I think it is really important for the fully representative council to be engaged in the results of our work.
Your predecessor put a lot of effort into really establishing the independence of your office, going as far as to get a measure on the ballot, I think in 2017, to strengthen autonomy, which passed overwhelmingly. To put a finer point on my earlier question, has the change in government impacted the autonomy or independence of your office at all? Or do you feel like you can make unilateral decisions without having to run it by the city administrator or the mayor's office? Has anything changed in those lines?
Well, I talked a little bit about kind of bumping up against those lines between the different branches of government.
Mm-hmm.
I think mostly I felt in my first term, one of the newly enjoyed powers that was given in those 2017 charter reforms that my predecessor achieved was more control over our budget and our human resources decisions. One of the earliest and more public battles that I faced was getting our first labor agreement signed, because there were questions over whether the auditor really could have sole authority to reach an agreement and sign it without the involvement of the Bureau of Human Resources or the city attorney's office. So that was a bit of a learning experience where we stepped back and actually created a formal agreement between the attorney and human resources so that we could achieve negotiations together in a way that wouldn't adversely impact the rest of the city. I think with the new form of government, there might be, we have that agreement in place still, so that's not been an issue so far. But I think I'm always looking for ways to protect our independence, whether that is making sure that functions still are residing in my office, or when counselors have ideas about, hey, wouldn't it be great if the auditor took this on, reminding them if it's not in charter, then it does require some engagement with our office and officially my consent.
Sure. Well, let's zoom out a little bit. I think a question a number of folks in the audience have had is around kind of the federal impacts on your office and the city in general. President Donald Trump wasted no time in passing a flurry of executive orders after entering office this year that can impact local funding, programs, policy. Do you see any of the work coming out of the White House around these executive orders having an impact on your work, and in what ways?
Well, I think there are a couple things to remember about the auditor's office. One is that we are independent from the rest of the city. So the rest of the city is subject to the direction of the mayor, whereas my functions in my purview are under my direction and control.
Does that mean that any executive orders from the mayor do not impact your office?
I was going to get to that. So our office is funded with general fund dollars. Mm-hmm. We don't have any federal grants, so they're not, those directives are not restricting funding that my office uses. But I think, again, with trying to protect and maintain our independence, I'm very careful that actions that the mayor might be taking or statements that the rest of the city might be putting out into the public don't necessarily reflect the views of my office or the actions that we're taking.
Yeah. So, for instance, any direction around tweaking language to impact federal grant funding, that doesn't impact your office? You don't see that? It
doesn't, because we're not restricted. We're not receiving those funds. I think what I'd like to say about that is that it's a priority of my office, and one of the values that I brought to this position is making sure that we are engaging diverse people in our work. We, as an office, and part of my ethos as an auditor is making data-driven decisions. So I think our office is really well equipped to justify investments that we're making in terms of trying to reach hard-to-reach Portlanders and making sure that their voices are guiding our work. Mm-hmm. So I think we're on very solid ground there.
Got it. This is a bit of a long one. Stick with me. So your office handles all election-related complaints. You received a range of them last election cycle, even one against City Club. One that made headlines recently, including a headline that I myself wrote, was about a campaign finance law complaint made against former city commissioner Renee Gonzalez, who ran for mayor last year. The complaints were around whether he used taxpayer dollars to help his campaign, among a few other things. But the complaints themselves aren't really the interesting thing here. Your office agreed that he did violate campaign finance law, but Gonzalez appealed the ruling, arguing that it was unconstitutional for your office to not let him defend himself in a hearing before you made the determination, and a judge agreed, saying it violated due process rights. So in short, the judge said that the way the city rules on elections complaints is unconstitutional. So I'm curious, what does that mean for your office as you're approaching another election cycle in November? Are you changing the way that these complaints are handled?
We are looking at ways to make the process fairer for all involved. That means extending the timeline that we have to determine whether a complaint has merit, giving our staff enough time to gather appropriate evidence in order to make a final conclusion. And then, as the court pointed out, an opportunity for subjects of complaints to be heard before that final determination is made. That is a gap that we had identified and, was pointed out in the court proceedings.
So are you creating a kind of hearings stage in that process then?
An appeal or hearing, I think,
Sure.
is the right way to phrase that, and we'll need to get buy-in from council in order to make tweaks to the city code.
Okay. I realize it's a little wonky, but someone who covers these elections things, it's interesting to me. So one more election question, or maybe a couple more, but the last election was the city's first under ranked choice. As someone who oversees the city's municipal elections, is there anything in particular that your office learned during the last election cycle that you're thinking about changing or learning from in this upcoming, next November's election?
Yeah, I think, this is a good opportunity for me to expand a little bit on one of your previous questions about whether things have changed in the auditor's office. I guess something that has shifted is in the first ranked choice voting election, which was last November, which was very successful. Our office shared responsibility for conducting voter education. That was something that we did in collaboration with the city's transition team. This election, the 2026 election, we will be managing the voter education functions on our own. So we're using results from the first election. We're also gathering experiences from voters to understand what we could do differently, how we could better reach folks that maybe didn't participate at such a high rate or had trouble understanding their ballot. But generally, the results that we've found from an independent pollster is that people generally understood how to use their ballot. The results show that they were using at least ranking 3 candidates, which is exactly what ranked choice voting is designed to do. And then the results show that over half of voters were reading the material that we were putting in their ballots, so using the information that we provided to actually cast their vote.
What are some of the areas that you want to strengthen, though? I mean, in terms of boosting more education, I know that the data that you pointed to, it did show some inequities in kind of who's participating and why.
Yeah, so the results showed that voters in District 1, which is much of East Portland, were slightly less aware of ranked choice voting. So we have some more outreach to do there. And then also voters of color were slightly less aware in terms of how to use their ranked choice ballot. So this summer we're planning on trying to understand better the nuances of those differences, and then also equip people in those communities with information to be trusted sources of information.
So typically in Oregon, the mechanics of voting are conducted by the county or the state. I think it's pretty, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels pretty unique, at least in Portland, to have it coming from the city. How do you, as the leader of the local elections, how are you working with the county and the state during these kind of wild election seasons to make sure, to make sure everything's kind of going smoothly? And do you feel like this is a responsibility that could be streamlined a bit more among those governments?
Well, I think each partner that you mentioned has its own distinct role. I think there's value in segregating those different duties for the purpose of checks and balances and integrity in the results. At the City of Portland, we're mostly concerned with getting candidates and measures certified to the ballot, and then, of course, educating voters on how they're going to use it. But Multnomah County is responsible for actually counting the votes, getting out the voters' pamphlet, and then publishing the ballot. So it does require close coordination between those different parties. And I think we've done a good job, just since the inception of charter changes, we had to work closely with the county to make sure that our ranked choice code was written in a way that was workable. So having those two sides of the house, I think, was really important and critical to our success.
One question I've always had, the city has increasingly moved towards more public-private partnerships. The city hiring on contractors to do work that's considered city work, whether that's shelters or, trash pickup, whatever that is. Do you have any thoughts on this pattern? I think as the city's revenue continues to struggle, there's more reliance on kind of those partnerships. I don't see it going away anytime soon. But what are your thoughts on kind of this trend, both in terms of accountability and oversight as an auditor and cost effectiveness?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say first have to point out that on this year's audit schedule is Portland Solutions, which is includes the programs that you just mentioned. So cleanup or impact reduction, I think, is what it's been called. Really the city's efforts to respond to our homelessness crisis. So there might be opportunity for us to look into how those programs are interacting and how those services are delivered. I think it becomes an interesting question for auditors and accountability when it comes to our access to information and our perspective on who's being audited. Generally, we're looking at, what responsibilities does the city have to provide a service? When they're contracting that out, it becomes very important that we still have access to information to evaluate how well the city is overseeing services that might be delivered by nonprofit or private partners.
And you're guaranteed that kind of access usually in those contracts, or do you have to negotiate sometimes?
Sometimes we have to negotiate it. We've been working with the city attorney's office on making sure that every contract makes it very clear that the auditor has access to records. So it shouldn't be an issue.
You mentioned the city's response to homelessness and submitted questions. Our audience asked a few similar questions on this topic. I know your office interacts with and engages with homeless policies related to homelessness in certain ways. Could you just explain to me kind of what role you see your office playing in addressing what's arguably the city's biggest issue?
Well, I think there are a number of ways that we are addressing it. One is just direct interaction with folks who are experiencing homelessness. We've seen in complaints to our ombudsman an uptick in both complaints about services, like the impact reduction program, but also complaints from folks who are in shelter, who have feedback to give about their experiences. The same goes for neighbors of shelters and other sites who have questions about safety and cleanliness of their neighborhoods. So we're hearing directly from people on this issue. And then I think we've also tried to engage folks who have those lived experiences in our audit work. So we did an audit of the Joint Office of Homeless Services shelter program, focusing specifically on shelters for adults and families. And we decided as auditors, like, maybe we are not the most approachable folks to be hearing about people's barriers to accessing shelter. So we contracted with Street Roots to help just disseminate a survey and conduct interviews to understand exactly what people are facing when they are trying to move from the street to permanent housing.
Are you doing that similar kind of outreach for the Portland Solutions audit you mentioned? Or?
We haven't yet started that work, okay. But depending on the scope, there might be opportunity for folks with lived experiences to be sharing their perspectives with us, for sure.
Are there any instances where instead of fielding complaints and kind of concerns from the public and turning that into an audit that could take over a year, are there any ways where you can act faster to ring the alarm or at least notify maybe even elected officials about something that might feel dicey?
Yeah, so definitely with our ombudsman function, and our city ombudsman is in the audience today, we try to resolve issues that come to that office much faster than an audit would take, which can take anywhere from 9 months to a year. You had mentioned kind of how have things changed with the new form of government and our ability to interact with other electeds. I think when we are seeing issues that are emerging in certain parts of Portland, so a specific council district, we are able to say, hey, this is coming from a constituent in the community that you represent. Is there something that you can do to resolve or put pressure on the city to take action?
Another question informed by the audience around the parks levy. So I know we have a parks levy audit coming out. I think I heard yesterday, mid-October, right before the public is going to be asked to vote on whether to renew and extend the levy. How do you see that audit informing voters and playing a role in that mechanism?
Well, it's really a perfect storm when there is alignment between our audit schedule, the interests of voters, and also the interest of our electeds and city administrator in the outcome. I think we always strive to be relevant and timely in the topics that we are auditing, and I'm very excited that we're going to be able to deliver those results before the election. The topic, as it is phrased on our audit schedule, is parks fiscal management. And we've also done audit work on asset management that identified a huge backlog in the city's ability to manage its and pay for its infrastructure. So there's a lot of overlap between the two topics. It will be very timely and relevant for voters, but I don't think it's, at least as far as our asset management audit showed, like the city has aging assets, and we really need to think about how we're going to care for those long term so that Portlanders continue to experience amenities that they love.
Right now, maybe more than ever, I hate that phrase, but there's really limited and dwindling trust in government at kind of all levels. It seems harder and harder to get the public to engage and also have them trust that what elected officials are doing is their best interest. How are you thinking about, especially because the role that your office has in accountability, how do you think about building the public's trust in your office, in elections, in oversight? What steps do you take and to approach that?
Well, I think there are a lot of different ways to talk about trust. One, the public doesn't really distinguish between which government you represent, whether it is local, state, regional, sometimes even federal, that we get seen as a monolith. I think what is important for our office to distinguish is that we are so rigorous in our fact checking, in our information gathering, in our quality control systems that the public can really trust information when it's coming from my office, whether that's election results that we might be reporting, information about a historical record, or, statements that we make about how the city programs are being run. I think it's really important for us to be unified also in our, this is part of kind of my vision for being a more accessible office, making sure that people can recognize, oh, this came from the auditor's office. It means being really consistent in how we communicate, using plain language, making sure that we're visually accessible and recognizable.
What does becoming more accessible look like? I mean, do you have office hours? Are you getting out in community and kind of obviously today is one of those options maybe, but being able to show that there's an open door and curiosity and the public's concerns?
Yeah, I think a big part of it for me is having a presence in community. So events like this, outreach work that we're doing to build connections in community. We have a number of events planned this fall to be at farmers markets, to be in a welcoming event for new Portlanders, just to let folks know we exist. We're here to listen to you and serve you. It also means making sure that we have some way for constituents to email us, to have someone answer the door or the phone when they need help. So those are all things that we've worked on scaling up since I took office.
What would you say are kind of the biggest barriers in your office to the work, to getting through a long audit, to getting access, to producing strong results?
Certainly, if we're not experiencing immediate access to information, that will slow us down. We really do rely on the perspectives of folks who are doing the work to point us to the problems that we might be able to dig deeper into. So if folks are not being candid, that might be another reason why we are struggling to find a topic or a topic within a topic, a question that is going to add value for Portlanders or people who are benefiting from the services that the city provides. I think another barrier sometimes is just navigating the new structure. So while we have clear branches of, policymakers and administrators, Portland's organizational structure has changed a couple times since a new form of government took shape. And so that means making sure we are engaging all the right parts of the city as a matter of fairness, so that they know that an audit is being conducted, but also so that we're being thorough enough in gathering all the information that we need.
Are there any areas, I know you have an audit schedule, and so maybe this is the answer to it, but are there any specific areas where you think the city needs more oversight right now? Any programs or policies or departments that, are front of mind in terms of we need to really be thinking about this a bit more?
Yeah, I think areas where the city is trying something new is always ripe for audit. I mentioned Portland Solutions is kind of this, it's been, initially was, I believe, an initiative of Mayor Wheeler. It's moved around a couple times in the city's organizational structure. It's not always clear to Portlanders or folks who are experiencing homelessness. Am I interacting with the county? Am I interacting with the city? Who can I go to if I have an accountability issue or a safety concern? So that's definitely a reason why that's on the list. I think another audit that I'm excited about is the police's body-worn camera program. That's been in the works for a while, and our office has done work on surveillance and information gathering. It's very important, while that technology can be extremely beneficial in terms of improving fairness and transparency around interactions between police and community. It's really important that that information isn't being kept for longer than necessary or for purposes that it wasn't intended for.
So I think the public knows that you do these deep dive investigations into different departments and programs. I am curious what kind of enforcement comes with that. I know maybe you do kind of year check-ins after you do an audit, 6 months, whatever that might be. But are you able to actually, force the city to do much and programs to do much? I mean, what kind of, in terms of accountability, what is the enforcement arm there and doesn't exist?
Well, outside of campaign finance, we really don't have enforcement authority. So getting back to that idea of building trust and having integrity is so important for us to be able to be credible and use our powers of persuasion to create change. I've changed the way that we have followed up on audit recommendations. Previously, our office was issuing standalone reports about audits that we conducted at the 1 and 2 year mark. I decided with the change in government, let's take a more comprehensive approach so that we are following up annually on recommendations that are outstanding in the last 5 years. And that gives us one metric that we can all work towards in terms of implementing recommendations citywide, and then also looking at themes that might be carrying across years or across different functions of the city that city administration can focus on.
Well, with that, I want to move on, I believe, to questions from folks in the audience, from City Club members. I believe Sam here will have the microphone. Anyone here has a burning question for Auditor Rede, you can see him, or maybe he will track you down, maybe line up behind him. Yeah, getting up there if possible.
Yes, when you step up, please state your name, you're a City Club member, and remember to make these questions and keep them under 30 seconds, please. Stand right there. I'll hold.
Hi, my name's Ken Fairfax, City Club member, and I was the chairperson of the committee that wrote the report suggesting the change in the City Club, the form of government for City of Portland. In addition to the equity reasons for changing, another reason cited was efficiency and the excessive stovepiping that took place under the commission system. I was curious if the auditor's office has any plans or anything going on to look at whether the coordination between different government departments is improving, especially due to the number of witnesses that told us they would get one ruling from Department A, the opposite from Department B, and of course they would never talk to each other.
Well, I think you've identified one of the themes that came through in our last audit impact report, which is that effort I mentioned annually to see how well the city is doing at implementing our recommendations. That is definitely something that came through and that we've emphasized and made a call for action on, is just coordination between bureaus. Permitting is one of those areas for sure where we have seen some movement based on recommendations from our audit work, and there's shared recognition there between the different branches of government that some improvements could be made.
To follow up, sorry, are you able to audit the form of government changes, like our audit charter changes as a whole, or look at that more in-depthly?
I thought that was going to be the question. That is one that I consider, it's like a black swan. If we audit this, will we ever have another major government transformation where we could apply these learnings? I think that's like the big question to think about, because it would be a massive audit. I think we'd probably have to figure out, like, okay, which part of this would we look into, because it was the change of government in terms of multi-member districts. In order to maintain the integrity of our work, we wouldn't audit our own education efforts in terms of ranked choice voting. But there might be aspects of the transition that we might be interested in auditing.
Wynn Wakala, City Club member. Back in the early 80s, I was over the Fiscal Administration Division for the Portland Police, and we started for the first time performance measures. And we did one that was the 3-minute emergency response time, which of course meant if you didn't have enough staff, you couldn't make that. Have you been doing auditing of performance measures? And I know it might not always be staffing, it might be procedures, or can you tell us some results of some of that?
Yeah, I think performance measures are a great input for us when we're doing our audit work. When they exist, it's a great resource to be able to compare for benchmarking purposes how are city programs faring compared to other jurisdictions. I haven't seen a lot in place, certainly not at an organizational level at the City of Portland. I'm hopeful that with this more unified structure under one city administrator that we might be moving in that direction, and that gives us really good criteria as auditors for accountability and performance improvement.
We used to have them citywide, so it sounds like they went away, because we did have them citywide. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of performance measures.
Okay.
Hi, Alexis Gonzalez, member of the New Leaders Committee with City Club. I'm working with arts and culture, and I recognize that your office has the arts tax on the audit at the end of the year. Could you share anything about that?
Sure. So we are doing an audit of the Arts and Education Fund, I believe is what it's officially called.
Colloquially, the arts tax.
The arts tax. That's what
With an eye roll.
taxpayers know it as. So we're looking at how those funds are being spent. I think that's a really important distinction between the auditor's role and council's role. They pass policy. We look at the outcomes. So we're looking at how far are those dollars going in terms of benefiting youth, benefiting organizations, and I'm sure we'll have things to say about how it's impacting the arts landscape in the Portland area.
We have more written questions, which I will loosely paraphrase. How do you choose the next division to audit? Is there a whistleblower component?
That's a good question. So I spoke some to our annual audit schedule or planning process where we publish the list of topics. Another important function that our office performs is managing the fraud hotline. And that is more traditionally a whistleblower function where we're taking complaints from city employees and also members of the public when they think that fraud, waste, or abuse of city resources might be happening. So in those cases, we'll investigate and issue reports. Those are, again, more timely than an audit because we are being responsive to a particular concern that's being raised. And then if there are patterns, much like in the ombudsman function, we can initiate a systemic review. If we think an issue is affecting maybe more than one Portlander or city employee, we can dig deeper.
Win Wakala again. I was always a principal accountant for the city, and it's kind of, people think of it as boring, and I'm sure auditing sounds the same way. Can you tell us something exciting? Some exciting performance, some audit that was really exciting and you were surprised by the outcome, or when you looked into it, you were surprised by the results?
I suppose this is my opportunity to sell performance auditing. Well, like I said, the behind the scenes aspect, I think, is the most thrilling part of the job. That's not something that I get to do so much now in the elected role. But when I was a performance auditor, I got to visit child care centers. I got to go to the Oregon Zoo. These are things, and also work on the state's first audit of TriMet. So you get to learn about so many different areas of government. It's a real privilege, I think, to have that access and opportunity to create change.
Do you have an audit that you can point to that you feel like really made substantial change?
Let's see. I think I would point to. I worked at Metro Regional Government for 7 years under the elected leadership of Brian Evans. And I felt like one of the most concrete audits that I worked on was an audit of the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Program, because it was an area where a lot of lofty goals were set in place that sounded good and people were excited about. But when it came to making progress, there were not a lot of things to point to show that progress was being made. So that felt like it was a topic that I cared about. It was something that was important to the organization. And then we were able to bring in kind of our rigorous analysis and say, hey, if you were really wanting to make change in these areas, you got to have the right resources, you've got to have ways to measure your results, and you have to make sure that the changes that you're wanting to see are well defined.
Ted Kay, City Club member. Portland has an auditor, Multnomah County has an auditor, the state has auditors. Besides a secret auditor handshake, when you get together, what do you talk about?
I'm not aware of any secret handshake. Well, I'm very proud to live in a region that has elected auditors at the local and regional level. Not every part of the country has that. I've been trying to grow my network of elected auditors, and I'm happy to include Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Syracuse, New York in that community. When we get together, we typically talk about our budget. How can we increase it so that it is sufficient to hold our jurisdictions accountable? We also talk about our interactions with other elected officials. There's often a lot of tension, as you can imagine, as deliverers of inconvenient information, how to navigate those relationships and make sure that they remain productive. And then I think, as elected leaders, it's really important that since we sit outside the other branches, that we have that kind of support for each other, because it can be very lonely.
Hi, Chris Kobe, City Club member. You raised an interesting question. Who audits the auditors, and how is that done?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So other auditors audit us. Of course, they are not auditors that we are friends with. They're auditors that come from other jurisdictions. We don't get to choose who they are, but the government audit standards require that we have a peer review every 3 years. And that is actually something that I'm most proud of. In 2024 is when we had our last one, and we were issued a clean opinion with no comments, no deficiencies. And we got especially high marks for having strong equity analysis and also accessible reporting methods.
I have another question. You mentioned budget a couple of answers ago, and how that's a big point of discussion with other auditors. The City of Portland's budget is decided by the mayor, is passed and adopted by City Council. But as an independent office that's independent of both of those elected bodies, how do you maintain autonomy when it comes to fighting for your budget and holding the line when we don't have that much money and it's going to be picked and pulled in many different areas?
Yeah, it's a really delicate matter. Unfortunately, when we talk about the auditor's independence, it does have some limitations, at least in the city of Portland. I don't have budget autonomy. What we propose as an office is subject to approval from the mayor and ultimately city council. This year was a tight budget year. It resulted in a reduction to our office of 2.5%. And we are already such a small part of the city's budget that those impacts are really acutely felt. That reduction meant laying off an employee, reducing our budget for voter education, and also our legal reserves. And our office performs very necessary functions for the city. Functions that even other electeds rely on, like public record keeping. We are there to make sure that city employees, including elected officials, are being compliant with state records law. And so when those cuts are being made, we certainly feel them, and I think it is a threat to transparency for the city.
One last written question. Does an announcement that your office will audit a specific division cause consternation or dread in that division?
We tried for that not to be the case. We're very transparent in terms of, publishing the schedule is like, okay, an audit is coming. We then issue something called a job start letter that goes out to everyone that is either working on the program, and then in addition, we notify elected officials in that communication to say that, okay, the audit is underway. And then we have like a kickoff meeting that gets everyone at the same table and explains the process. We also have materials that we share publicly about what to expect during an audit. So we try to make it as non-threatening as possible. And I have full faith in our staff that they are they're conducting audits professionally.
Thank you. In Columbo's words, one last question.
Hi, this is Bobby Reagan, member of City Club. As President Trump is seeming to target sanctuary cities of late, or about to, have you ever done any kind of audit around our sanctuary city status and whether the law will hold up, whether it needs to be strengthened, anything to that effect?
The quick answer is no. Portland is a sanctuary city, like other cities across the country. That those sanctuary laws have withstood legal challenge. Ours has not been challenged, but I imagine it would have the same outcome. We generally don't audit things that can be decided legally or even under subject to legal proceeding. So I don't know that would be something that we look into, but certainly other commitments that the city is making around equity and inclusion are ones that are of interest to my office.
As someone who follows city council way too closely, I believe there was a budget note specifically to the city attorney's office that was to dig in a little bit more to what our sanctuary status looks like and if it's legally sound and all of that. So I think there will be some information from that coming at some point.
Thank you. Am I on? As we begin to close the program, there's a couple of things I heard that I wanted to respond to. One is the hesitancy of auditing the new form of city government. And what I heard was there is a good City Club research report. So we'll be doing our good government contribution, I hope, on that question for you. The second I heard is that City Club got name-checked by Ms. Zielinski in connection with a campaign violation allegation. And so I can report to you that when those complaints are made, the auditor's office responds immediately and with care, and did so in our case, and dismissed it immediately. Well, thank you. That was in connection with our mayoral forum last year. So now that concludes our program. And I want to thank Auditor Rede and Ms. Zielinski for helping us understand much more than I knew about the auditor's office. And we want to thank our sponsors, AARP Oregon and Fight Against Sex Trafficking, for sponsoring this event. Before I get to the end though, I want to share information about our next program, which is on October 3rd. It's a program with Therese Bottomley, now the former editor of the Oregonian, with about 40 years of experience in that job. And she'll provide a history of interesting subjects that she dealt with as the editor. And that program will be moderated by Carrie Timchuk. Let me say that all over again. Carrie Timchuk, the executive director of the Oregon Historical Society, and some of you may be familiar with him. I look forward to that program. It will be right here in the University Place on October 3rd. So now that concludes our program. Thank you all for joining us and for your attention to this program. If you'd like to learn more about City Club, if you'd like to join us, if you're not a member, there will be information on the table out in the foyer. If you are a member and you'd like to get involved more, we welcome your involvement in research, in developing programs, and in any other way that you can contribute to the club itself. Again, thanks to both of you, Auditor. And thanks to all of you for coming today.